Ravens Watch.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of The Ravens Watch. I am your host, David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven, and today's guest is Paul, and we're just going to keep it at Paul. Paul and I met on Twitter, where he shared with me a pretty interesting story, and I had you follow up with an email, and luckily you kept it a little bit sparse because I like to sort of hear these things with fresh ears. Sometimes I tell people to send me your story, and I'll get a whole wall of text, and it's compelling and it's interesting, but I'm like, I gotta like look away because I don't want to see things, before the interview. And so what you sent me piqued my interest. Details like sleep paralysis, your father being a deacon, and things of that nature. And so I said, that sounds great. Let's start a show together today. And here you are. Paul, how are you, brother?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.
Happy to share my experiences with you.
I'm glad to have you. Paul, why don't you start from your earliest experiences? Sometimes that's kind of the best way, doing things in chronological order.
Okay. So when I was a kid, apparently I had a terrible seizure and nearly died and was taken home to die, basically. And so some people think that's where kind of it started from, and maybe I had some spiritual connection. I don't know. But I've had sleep paralysis issues since I was very young, and terrible nightmares. And not you could put it relate it to my family background, but I actually have a lot of siblings, and nobody else has what I have. So it's interesting that it's unique to me. But I've had these horrible nightmares, and some I remember from my childhood vividly because they're pretty terrifying.
Oh, let's talk about that. When you say bringing you home to die, that paints a pretty dark picture. So you're saying that the doctors more or less didn't expect you to make it, and so your family had to bring you home and sort of wait for the end.
Right. Apparently I had a terrible seizure. I had eaten some medication that I shouldn't have eaten. That wasn't for consumption. I was 2 or 3. And I don't know every detail. It was a long time ago. It was the early 80s. But from what I was told, the doctor said there's nothing else I can do for him, so take him home, and if he lives, he lives. So,
wow. What were the nature of these nightmares? It's sometimes interesting, right, that you can remember dreams and nightmares from, what did you say, about 3 or 4 years old?
Right. So there's one that I remember that was the very first nightmare that I can remember. It was so vivid, and I was in a wide, expansive cave, and there were like a cavern, and then there were little caves dotted around it, where they were all darkened, except one was the cave was my bedroom, interestingly enough. And then I had family members and friends of the family who were in the cave with me, and they were trying to find their way out. And then these dragons appeared and were chasing everyone. And then one of them got me, and I turned into a dragon, which it sounds kind of silly, but this is just how it is. I remember I was in like a dragon suit, and I could unzip the zipper. But he got me while I was trying to get to my room. And so that's kind of a silly example, but that's what the dream was. And it was scary as a very young child. And but I went on to have scarier dreams from there.
Okay, and at this point, are dreams the only experiences that you're having at this age?
So I'm having some sleep paralysis, but they get more. They happen more often when I become a little older.
Okay. So let's go forward a little bit. You said that the dreams, they get more intense.
Yeah, so the typical dream is me laying in bed. I say dream, but it's also sleep paralysis. So sometimes it's a dream and then sleep paralysis. So one leads into the other. So a very common dream that I had was that I was in my home and my family members were in the home with me. And it wasn't a light, it was like an eerie yellow haze. And one by one, my family members would leave the room and disappear until all of them were gone. And then the haze would start to get darker and darker and darker until it was very dark. And I was all alone and very much felt alone and afraid. And always with these dreams, there's a sense of fear. I'm feeling it right now. You just feel it. It's just like in your chest, you know. And sometimes after it became dark, I'll see things poking out their heads outside. One of them, which was really scary, was I ran into my bedroom in the dream. The door shut and it was complete darkness, and I heard something just cursing at me, just in the most foul way you could think of. And it's just in complete darkness, feeling completely helpless and alone. So it's pretty dark. It's never happy, never like a good experience in sleep paralysis. Because when that would end, I would go into the sleep paralysis, and then I'm there in my bed and I'm looking, and usually I'm seeing a darkened head poking out with little horns on its head, and not an obvious face, but some kind of just shadow type creature.
Well, the beginning of your story so far, and this closeness to death that you experienced as a child, I'm sure these sorts of things, they kind of spark an interest. I've had experiences. I attribute those experiences to being the reason that I'm interested in the things that I'm interested in. And with those sorts of events, a lot of people express sentiments of the thinning of the veil between our realm and this parallel realm, right? Where these entities reside. And it's hard to say definitively which one of these two things is happening. Is it our getting so close to death thins the realm, or does it pique the interests of various entities, or is it a mixture of two? But I'm sure by now you're familiar with that kind of concept.
Sure. And I could go into kind of my background, where I'm from, and that plays into it as well. So
right. That was sort of in regards to your father being a deacon, do you mean?
So my dad is a deacon, but he's had spiritual experiences as well. And I'm also Cajun. So there's a lot of spiritual elements that come with the Cajun culture, including.
That's you're talking about being from Louisiana?
Right.
Oh, well then, do you still live in Louisiana, by the way?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so then I'm going to have to bother you after the show because I'm going to Louisiana the end of September, my wife and I, and she wants to go we're going to go see a show, and we're going to have a good time, but there's no way that I'm going to go there without looking for, that's sort of the paranormal capital of America, right? You have Demeter and Dracula.
Sure. Yeah, New Orleans is a big hub for that, and there's a lot of places down in the bayous. In fact, I got this book just in case the subject came up, but I read this when I was a kid. I don't know if you can see it.
Ghosts Along the Bayou.
Yeah, so I read this when I was a young kid, and one of the houses was 2-3 miles down the road from where I live. But this lady, Christine Word, she went around Acadiana, which is the area I grew up in, to the kind of the Cajun settled areas of Louisiana. and just picked up these old cool stories about ghosts and let people explain their experiences and just documented them all down. So,
Oh, that's very cool.
so when I was, I don't know, maybe seven-ish, I got a hold of this book, and because of my experiences, I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. So I dug in and found out about all these plantation homes and just really cool stories about ghosts in my area. So it made it really real for me, you know, the ghostly aspect of life.
So you have to know of a couple of, because what I don't want to have the surface level tourist experience, you know, but I also don't want to delve so deep that I'm, you know, investigating crypts. I just want to experience some aspect of the sort of rich occult paranormal history of New Orleans. And so off air, I'll bother you for some pointers as to where to go. Hopefully, you know a couple of things.
I do, yeah.
Okay, great. So getting back into this, I had asked if you were familiar with the thinning of the veil or the peaking of the interests of these entities, and you said that your father being a deacon, you sort of alluded to that playing into your thought process when it comes to these things.
Right. Yeah, faith was very important in our family. My dad's a deacon. We'd say the rosary every night as a family. And he had been a monk before he met my mom. So, called the Trappist order. So he was very devout. And he brought that with him into our family life. And he shared stories about his own spiritual issues. One time he said he was shaving at night, getting ready for bed. Apparently he shaved at night. And while he was shaving, he had the door open and he looked in the mirror and he saw a small demon walking down the hallway towards his bedroom where my mom was. And so that terrified us as kids, but yeah, that was one of the stories that he told us. And then my mom has another story that really scared us about hearing clawing on the window at night, on the windowsill. So we had kind of those types of stories growing up where the paranormal wasn't foreign to us, and people seeing dead family members appearing, that was actually pretty common when I was a kid. Not so much anymore, but that was very common.
What when you say seeing things, right? Your father seeing a small demon, your mother hearing these scratching noises. What was I'm very interested in your father's interpretation of the nature of these things and what he made of them.
So because he's close to God, the idea is kind of a spiritual warfare mentality that, you know, he's trying to be a man of God and he's very close to God. He didn't tell me this story, but my sister said that he told her that when he was praying once as a Trappist monk, he levitated. So I don't know if that's true. He never told me, but he had a deep faith and very spiritual as well. So I think there was a thinning of the veil just with his relationship with God, and it may have I don't know, affected us somehow.
Well, did you grow up in Louisiana?
Oh yeah. All my young life, I grew up in a very small town in Louisiana, and that's probably why I ran off and joined the Air Force after I graduated from high school.
I hear that, and this is probably not a foreign concept to you either, but this idea that in certain places, Louisiana being one of them, that once again there's that expression of the thinning of the veil, that the barrier between our realm and this spirit realm or this parallel realm is thinner in some spots, and that in Louisiana, it's one of the more thin places. You know, like I said, I would say most people would associate, especially with the prevalence of voodoo and things of that nature, and Santeria, or Santeria. Uh, my relatives would be deeply upset if they heard me say Santeria.
Nope, I don't practice Santeria.
Being from where you're from, did you see these things around in your neighborhood?
I think that's more of a New Orleans thing. So in where I'm from, it was more Catholic faith and stories about dead relatives. And there were also stories about Native Americans. So we had a Native American grave near a baseball field where we played baseball one time, and supposedly it was haunted. So after a game one time, my friends wanted to show me where this grave was, and we went back there and we saw it was actually bricks, which I didn't think a Native American grave would be brick. Maybe they bricked it later, but we went back there, and they had a large tree behind it, and one of the branches just started shaking like crazy, and someone said he saw a figure behind it, a large looming figure. I didn't say anything, but I saw the branch shaking. We ran out of there screaming. But there are cool stories, just little pockets of cool little, ghost stories in the area, and people definitely believe in it. I think because of the faith and the traditions we have down there, and maybe the fact because modern society didn't really get to Louisiana until later. In the 1920s, most of the people in my small town spoke Cajun French. So we kind of had that settled culture for a long time until, and I think it's when people kind of lose their culture and get away from their faith practices that they kind of let go of that sense of the spiritual.
Yeah, it's my understanding that things like Santeria and voodoo and hoodoo, they were sort of these religious and spiritual beliefs that were held by Haitians and Africans, and that they sort of hid their belief system within Catholicism. So there was a morphing of the saints over time. And that's why when you see voodoo and Santeria, they're very saint heavy. And that's a little confusing to people, right? Because it's like, how do those two things jive together? And it was more like bred out of necessity in order to keep their beliefs alive. They subverted them and hid them within Catholicism.
I think of it more like a gumbo philosophy. They just mixed everything together. Gumbo pot, you throw all the ingredients in there. And so you'll see a lot of mixing of faith traditions in Louisiana and around the world. But I think they saw these cool things about Catholicism, and then they had the cool things from the African and maybe Haitian traditions, wherever the voodoo came from, and mixed them together. So because they're not. If you go to the voodoo or you see the history of the voodoo, I think they weren't really shy about telling you what it was, or they've always been kind of public about palm readings and voodoos and love potions and whatever they're trying to do with their voodoo.
What was your family's take on things like that, right? Because I imagine you probably got more psychics and things like that per capita. And that's kind of one of those things where I'm interested in getting a reading, but I don't know, because I'm not so well versed in Christianity or Catholicism. I don't know how that is interpreted. Some people think that you're letting something in just by virtue of having a reading. To me, that I don't know that makes sense. But like I said, my knowledge is limited. How did your family look at practices like that?
My dad just completely condemned anything like that. But on the same side, we had our own people who were kind of faith healers called Satyrs. And so there's a lot of literature about them, and I had them in my family line as well on my dad's side. These people who, before doctors were around, you have these people called Satyrs who had their specialty, and they could pray over you, and you would be healed from certain things. Some things as simple as warts, but also more serious conditions. if you got the flu, you go see this traiteur. And so that was kind of a cool thing, but not so much mystical as in psychics. So psychics, my dad would say, well, that's the devil. My modern interpretation would be that you got to be cautious of what you're opening yourself up to, and you never know what people are involved in spiritually. So.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? Because it's like, just because I think that some people are inherently gifted, and that's just based off of what I've seen. I think I'm pretty good at spotting sort of a con person, somebody who is good at cold reading, or says things that are general enough that they fit, and then they can kind of whittle you down gradually through open-ended things like that. But then again, I've seen things that are uncanny and very strange to me. And so I'm not, I think I'm of the school of thought that some people are probably naturally gifted or having these experiences, although some of them would beg to differ, right? In the gifted sense. Some of them are like, I hear voices, I can't get them to stop.
Okay. That's different too. So as far, I'm differentiating palm readers from people who can sense the spiritual. And so we have a tradition. I don't know, maybe this is bigger than South Louisiana, but people who supposedly, if you were born and you had a veil of skin over your eyes that they had to remove, that you could see ghosts, you can see the spirits of the dead. And so there are some people who just were known to be able to see dead people. And
right. And a lot of those people would probably say it's not a great thing to have going on.
I'll say pray for them. We did believe in the dead. Catholics believe in purgatory, that if you see a spirit, they're asking for prayers, and they want to pay up their ransom before they go to heaven. So that was a very common idea as well.
So let's get back to these experiences. We left off sort of the sleep paralysis experiences, and seeing in your nightmares these sort of shadow people, small horns, as you describe them. So what are some of the other things that you remember as time goes on?
So they had different experiences and different things would show up. So I'd see different things. So one guy was a bald guy with a hood. And I want to say that's the only time I saw someone that was like a man. It was a man. And, if I saw a picture of him, I would be able to recognize him. Bald guy with a black hood, kind of just hanging here, and just staring at me. Didn't look like he was very happy. I had one with an old hag. That was a dream that turned into sleep paralysis. It was an old hag.
What was happening in the dream?
So in the dream, I saw her, and she was this hunched over, ugly little lady. Oh gosh, I just realized something. My brother, my brother and my nephew saw it with their own eyes later in life. They saw something exactly like that, and I'm just putting that together right now. But when I was a kid, I saw in this dream this old hag, and she ran up and she grabbed me, and told me she would feed me to the dog. Not to dogs or to the dog, whatever that means. So, and that was pretty terrifying. But later in life, my nephew and my brother, who are the same age, they apparently walked through the room that used to be my bedroom, and they saw a creepy old looking lady in our house. And my nephew pushed my brother down and then ran out of the room. So
together in waking life, they both saw this in your old room?
It was daytime at the time. And they walked in the room, and there was some creepy old ghost hunched over lady in the room. And my nephew very courageously pushed my brother down and then ran out of the room. So
every man for himself.
Yep. So I wasn't there to see it. I heard about it later.
You're familiar with the the old hag itself, right? Like the lore of this old woman who presses down on your chest while you're sleeping. And there's sort of these archetype characters, which I think are very strange. A lot of people. Did you happen to listen to episode 4? I had an author on named Vicky Joy Anderson, and she is somewhat of an expert in sleep paralysis, and she understands very well the sort of reductive psychological medical analysis of sleep paralysis, right? Being that it's a natural function of the body. You don't want to be acting out your dreams. Sometimes the wires get crossed and your eyes pop open before you're out of the paralysis. And so the paralysis strikes up a certain amount of fear in you because it's uncomfortable and it's unfamiliar. And also just being paralyzed is terrifying. And then because you're somewhat still in a dream state, they say that your eyes can, the hallucinogenic effects of dreaming are still happening. And so you can make things out of the shadows in the corners of your room where there otherwise is nothing. So what Vicky does is she starts to basically collect information and pick out the things that are repetitive across many people's experiences, but that can't be quantified as a purely psychological event. And one of the things that she highlights, and I'm very much inclined to agree with her, are these archetype characters. I've told my stories on episode 1 about the man with the hat and the duster coat. Very many people have also seen either the hooded figure that people kind of they relate it to the figure of death, but not always a skeleton. And then the old hag, which is this old woman who's pressing down on your chest and causing you to be paralyzed. And that is a difficult thing to quantify, right? Because it's like, even if it was a hallucination and your eyes are playing tricks on the shadows, which I don't agree with that, but let's entertain that thought, right? Certainly we can think of more terrifying things than an old woman or than a man with a Zorro cape and hat. Right. And also that these things aren't unique to the West. That becomes strange because especially the man with the hat is more of a, maybe you could say, Central America and North American archetype, but yet you'll find stories in Japan where that outfit doesn't hold the same cultural weight that it does here in the States. And so it is interesting, that you've seen, at least, I mean, to me, it sounds like you also saw the death figure, as well as this old hag. And so
that man as well.
And then for your nephew and your brother to see it too, it throws the whole thing out the window. How is this purely a psychological event?
Yeah. And that's what I've wondered. So I've looked into sleep paralysis as well. I've had a healthy fascination with the subject. So I've seen the documentary on Netflix, and I've done a lot of research on it. And I know it can be explained away. Like you said, the mind will make you fall asleep so that you don't act out all of your dreams. And you might have this moment where there's a semi-conscious, and there was one point where I believed it was all spiritual. There's another point where I thought, well, maybe it's all medical and can be explained. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, why can't it be both? Maybe it's right medical. Maybe you're in a veil state. Maybe sometimes it's just medical. Maybe sometimes it's more spiritual. Just because something happens doesn't mean it's necessarily spiritual, but it could be. You got to look into it. Every situation is unique. So
you said that so this woman is in your dream, and she tells you that she's going to feed you to the dog, which is, I agree, an odd way to phrase that, the dog. But okay, the dog. She's very particular. And then you said that this transitions into you're no longer asleep, but are you still having interactions with her?
No, although that happened one time. Where?
I mean, in that one event,
No, I
based
didn't
off
see the
of what you
hag.
said, did you wake up and were in a state of paralysis?
I woke up and I was in a state of paralysis. But I didn't see the hag when I was in the paralysis. But I couldn't move, and you do the things where you try to wiggle your fingers and try to snap out of it. There are little tricks you pick up, try to pray. But in that instance, no, she wasn't. I didn't see the hag.
How old were you when that one happened?
Like 11-ish, 10, 11.
Okay. All right. So let's go forward a little bit more. Do you have any other ones?
I have a lot more.
Let's go.
Okay. So some are just crazy, and I can't explain them, but I'll just. One time, I woke up and I couldn't move, but I was at the ceiling looking down at my body and my brother, who I shared a room with. And I could feel arms around me, holding me kind of tightly. And in the dream, in this moment, I could see myself, I could see my brother, and I tried to pray in my brain to Saint Michael the Archangel or to Jesus. And I felt the feeling of falling down and the impact of landing in bed. And I woke up and I was out of it. So that was.
That one is so impressive to me in the sense that I have heard, and I'm sure you have, right? Because we go down these paths and we learn about these things because they happen. I have heard that story so many times about seeing. Oh, you've not discovered this?
Not that. I've heard
man.
But not the out of body type situation.
So you've come to the right place then. So I have heard several times because I listen to a lot of testimony from people who have had experiences like this.
Okay.
And I very much like to draw, and I'm going to go ahead and shout it out now. And if you're at all interested in content like this, there is a wonderful podcast called The Confessionals by a gentleman named Tony Merkel. And Tony collects people's stories, personal experiences. In fact, he was very much a driving force of inspiration for this show. And so I tip my hat to Tony because he's got 500 and something episodes, and I have listened to probably over 300 of them. And his show is all personal experiences, no conspiracy theory or occultism or anything like that.
Sure.
And so you get a real big chunk of data there. And this seeing your own body from a different perspective, often from an elevated perspective on the ceiling of your room. I'm telling you, Paul, I have heard this many times.
Wow.
And then also the coming back to your body with sort of a thud, like an impact, like very much like you landed in your body. Man, that is. After this show, I will see if I can't hunt down some of the episodes that have stories like that, and I bet you'll find some similar threads there. So I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just had to say that because that was it's just uncanny to hear that as many times as I have heard that.
That's cool. No, I haven't, and that would be really cool to hear other people with similar stories. Yeah, I think in the experience of being held, I got the sense that it was someone flapping, like the flapping of wings. I didn't see anything, but I knew something was holding me, and it had its arms around my chest like that. But yeah, I'd never heard any other stories about that, so that's really interesting. Probably the most terrifying experience, I can tell you that one, which is around the same time period. Was also a very unique experience. Was one night, so I prayed every night before I went to bed, mostly because I had all these nightmares. So I was always scared, always left the light on. And one night I fell asleep before I had prayed, which rarely happens because I had insomnia, probably just from fear of sleeping. And I woke up and I was like, okay, let me go ahead and pray, do my prayers. In the middle of the night, I don't know what time it was, um, but I threw my sheet over my head because I was scared, and I said my prayers, and I was going down my list of prayers I pray, and got to a point where we prayed for priests, deacons, bishops, and for the Pope. I'm a good Catholic. And while I was praying that, my mouth stopped moving. And I'm awake. I'm kind of like hunched, leaning on my arm, praying, and my mouth just stopped moving. And then my whole body froze up, and I couldn't move at all. And then, so my sheets over my head. I can't see anything. At my doorway, I could hear it from an elevated position. The growl of a man who is like professional growler, who can growl like a lion. Most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life.
From your doorway?
From my doorway, I could hear a man growling.
But you're awake.
I'm awake. Yep.
And how loud is this?
Pretty loud. I was terrified. So it sounded like a lion's roar, but you could tell it was a man. And the way it was, it would be impressive if it wasn't terrifying, because it was pretty good roar. And here I am just trying to pray. And
how old are you at this time?
Around that same age, well, maybe like 12-ish, 11, 12. So, and this one ends, so normally I snap out of it. This one, I'm trying to pray to St. Michael, whoever, can't move my mouth. So I go into the sleep paralysis from being awake. And then I fall asleep. This peace comes over me. So at some point while I'm trying to pray, everything becomes extremely peaceful. I could say there was an angel or God or something intervened, but it became very peaceful at some point. And I fell asleep. And I had a really quick dream. This is bizarre, because this has never happened either. I had a quick dream of my mom saying in a very sarcastic tone, "Oh, poor baby." And then I went to sleep after the dream. I've never had a dream that I didn't like wake up from really and remember. So I had this dream right after falling asleep, and then I was asleep. But I remember that little dream later. But it happened in kind of quick succession like that.
What when you say that you're awake and if I heard you correctly, you're sort of pulled into sleep paralysis. Can you describe to the best of your abilities, what does that feel like?
Just all the muscles freezing up. So my tongue stopped first. So I'm praying, and then it's like my mouth just wouldn't move, and then my lips wouldn't move, and then it kind of spread so that I couldn't move my whole body. So,
is there any sound accompanied with it?
Not that I recall.
And what about a sensation, like a buzzing sensation or a vibrating sensation?
There's definitely like a vibrate, well, like the muscles tensing up, and maybe it's the fight, I don't know, but you definitely feel it in your muscles and in your nerves, the tightening that you can't move.
So you're sucked into this sort of sleep paralysis after hearing the growl, correct?
Yes. Well, no, before. So it started before. So before I was praying, and then I couldn't talk anymore. My mouth wouldn't move. And then while I'm trying to fight to regain control of my speech, I hear the growl.
And you said afterwards there was sort of a sensation of peace.
Yeah.
So was the peace, did you have an overwhelming sensation of fear when hearing the sound?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, if not the most scary experience of my life, it was right up there. So it was terrifying. And then the only way I could explain it is something else intervened. It was very different from the terror that I was feeling, and I was filled with a very nice peace that it put me right to sleep, which I wouldn't have been able to sleep with that kind of fear.
Do you think that I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive, but you having this experience when you were a child of nearly dying, but then also couple that with your nephew and your brother seeing this woman in your room, it almost sounds like you had this perfect storm of you were susceptible because of your experiences, but then also being able to be experienced by other people suggests to me that there was almost a haunting or something with the house that you lived in.
Yeah, and so not all of my siblings experienced anything. So an old Catholic Cajun family, I have 11 siblings. So I have a good sampling of who had experiences. So I have two sisters who had experiences that were not the same as me, but were still spiritual in nature.
I'd like to hear about those.
Sure. So one of my sisters, she would see things. She would see people in her room, faces, and she thought they were people who had died. And she said she would just see them. She would hear them coming through her walls and her ceiling. And I don't know that it went beyond that for her. But she said sometimes they would jump.
Because that's already pretty intense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think she said sometimes they would jump on her bed or jump in her bed. But I don't think she had a variety of experiences beyond those type of experiences. And then my other sister had nightmares similar to me, and honestly, I don't know what else she had, but she had nightmares and was convinced the house was haunted. So one thing that I can attribute to maybe the house was haunted as well is sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I would hear music. And my big family, my dad is a teacher, not a lot of money, would always make us turn the radios off, didn't like that I left the lights on. So I'd wake up and sometimes I'm awake. So I would hear this music and I would try to find where it was so I could turn it off. Whoever's room it was, I would try to go and turn it off before my dad would find out and get angry at us. So I'd go on one side of the house, and it would be on the other side of the house. I'd walk on the other side of the house, and no matter wherever I went, the music seemed to displace, and that happened a couple of times when I was a kid.
So yeah, I feel like I'm inclined to believe that you were susceptible because of what happened to you, but then you also happened to be in a place where there was some amount of activity. And so would you say that you experienced it more so than your other siblings?
Yeah, much more so.
What do they make of it do you share these stories with them at all?
I think I did when I was younger, and they would just tell me to stop it because it was scary. Not that they didn't believe me; they just didn't want to hear. In some, like my sister who had the nightmares, she believed more, but mostly I just kept it to myself. I assumed other people were having similar experiences, and they just didn't talk about it, and I didn't really share it. It was just terrifying. So why would I share it with people?
Right. That's kind of I remember growing up and watching movies, whether it's a paranormal ghost movie or something, and whenever the main character would see something, or one of the main characters would see something, they often wouldn't share it with the other characters. And I was always frustrated because I'm like, why would you not say something? Say something. And then until it happens to you, and it's this really mixed bag of emotions, but I would say the primary driving factor to keeping it to yourself is that you feel like you're almost feeding it. If you talk about it, if you acknowledge it, then you're giving it attention, and that somehow is going to, exacerbate the problem. But I also can't help but feel like these things are banking on that, because I think that if you don't say anything, it really locks in the fear.
Sure.
And if you're that afraid that you're keeping these things. I think that they feed off of fear and negativity. I've had my own experiences. I talked about them in episode 1 where I was just in a dark place. I, wasn't taking care of the things that I should have been. I wasn't being the father that I should have been or the husband that I should have been. And so these things, they sort of weighed on me. And whether or not I was aware of it, I was depressed and I was anxious and I was angry. And that's like a perfect storm for these things. So I think that, and then I ended up experiencing some sort of entity, but I think that not sharing it, because if you don't share it, then you don't sort of brainstorm solutions in a group, and you don't strengthen the bonds, because if your siblings or your parents don't realize that you've got something going on, well, then they can't be there for you. And so then you're isolated in this experience. So now you're afraid and you're isolated. And I think that that is prime real estate, honestly. I think that that's how that works. And I wonder, is that a natural function of human beings where that's just kind of how it's going to go every time? Or are we being nudged in that way to not tell anybody because we think they're going to get mad, or we think that they're going to think it's stupid? Or, I have a story where my grandmother and her sister both saw a sleep paralysis entity when they were children. And then the following morning, they're speaking about it at the breakfast table, but they're doing it in hushed tones because they don't want their mother to overhear. Yeah. And, in this particular story, the mother hears and then confirms to the kids that she also had seen it the prior night. But speaking in hushed tones is, there it is. It's like you don't want other people to know, and it's not really clear why you don't want other people to know. It's a little bit messy. It's a little bit of like, they're going to dismiss it, they're going to judge me, but none of it stands on its own. It's not a very powerful reason, a definitive reason as to why. It's these wishy-washy reasons. And man, I just can't help but feel like that is by design.
Yeah, it definitely isolates you, and it doesn't put you in a good position. But I told my mom, because she would come with the holy water and chunk it around my room, and that always made me feel better.
Nice.
Like me some holy water. And obviously later on, I've developed much different attitudes about it. I was in the seminary for 5 years. But when you're young, it freaks people out, and then their minds will jump to you're weird because they're not experiencing this stuff. They don't think it's real or authentic. And so they'll just think you're nuts, and that you're sharing your cuckoo stories because you're a crazy person. And you don't want to be socially isolated. You don't want to be a social outcast. So that's part of it.
Right.
If they do believe it, they're scared, and they don't want that to come onto them as well. So.
Right.
But like you also said, if you talk about it, you're kind of inviting it. And there are times where I've talked about it, and I've had sleep paralysis episodes that very night. So it's like, if you talk about it, you welcome it in, and then it happens. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because Vicki Joy Anderson, my guest on episode 4, she said it, and it wasn't something that I was unfamiliar with. I've heard this before, but this third person perspective that you get, right, where you're now looking at yourself from an elevated position, it doesn't take too much of a thought process to start to imagine that was some aspect of you, right? Your physical body is here. It's a husk in this moment, and somebody has gotten a hold of your soul, or some people say astral form, things of this nature. And even when it comes to these alien abductions, that maybe they're not happening in the strictest physical sense, but that you're still having this experience. And it's not to say that it's, like we were saying earlier in the show, a purely psychological event or anything like that. But there is an aspect to us that we don't understand, especially in the West, that is much more than just our physical body.
Sure.
And that, you had the sensation of being held around by something. And so you still do have physical sensation, but it's not your physical body that it's happening to. but it is just as real, probably more real than your physical body is.
Right. And I've thought about that connection between the physical and the spiritual, because you have these people who have out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, and they come back and they remember everything from the exterior experience. So they bring that back into the body, and then somehow their brain can interpret that information. So
yeah, that's something is we're so lost. You know what I mean? As a people, we're so lost.
Right.
It's like we can't even get past the prove you have a soul. And it's like, I can't prove I have a soul to you, but I have this unbelievable feeling that is true. It feels more real than a lot of other things that are, definitively real according to other people. And I think as long as we can't get past that hurdle of, do you even have a soul, then we can't even have a conversation. That's why I enjoy doing the show, because I suspend disbelief, although most of the time I don't have to, because I have a lot of thoughts about, what's going on here. And because if you start, the whole prove it thing, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a non-starter. You can't even have a conversation. And I think those kind of things, especially in the West, we get caught up on them, and they stop us from understanding an aspect of our lives that is so real that it's potentially more real than certainly the 9-to-5 grind of going to work. It's hard to compartmentalize that too. It's all right. I got a job. I got to wake up early, drive to my job, go handle what I've got to handle, come back to bed at the end of the day, and still deal with this realm that people don't even believe is real. And it's like, I don't care what people believe. That doesn't help me when I'm having these experiences.
Right.
So it's just, it frustrates me sometimes, because we've lost so much understanding, and the rigidity of science has thrown itself on the gears of life and brought everything to a halt, to the point where we can't even have a conversation about the spiritual aspect of things. And I mean, I'm off my soapbox on that one. It's just frustrating.
I agree, because if there's a spirit, then it's a fundamental part of our existence, and it's going to account for so much of our life and the way that we find purpose and meaning, and it'll explain a lot of things that happen in life. And if you just completely exclude that as a possibility, you're just going to have to work with the data you have, and it's not going to explain everything.
Right. So let's move forward. Do you have any other experiences that you want to share?
If you want to hear about the Hat Man.
Of course, dude, that's my bread and butter right there. You kidding me? Let's hear about the Hat Man. Let's go.
Okay. So this was in college. So this is late teens. So, and it's interesting when I move to different places, I have different experiences too. It's like different entities are at these different locations. And so I have other experiences as well. But the Hat Man one was unique as well, for a couple of reasons. So I'm in the college dorms, living it up, and I'm by myself at this point, and wake up middle of the night, and I have the experience of sleep paralysis. And this is the weird thing, because I'm actually facing the wall away from the door. But when I'm in sleep paralysis, I can see the door. So I kind of have this ability to see all around me. But I can see the door, and I can see a shadow figure with a wide brim hat and kind of a suit. And he's not doing anything. He's not jumping at me. He's not really even menacing. I don't even have the same level of terror. It's scary, but I don't have the terror feel that comes with a lot of these. So he's there, and I'm there, and this is the first time I'm like, it's not too scary. And I was like, you know what? I've never just tried to ignore it. So this isn't terribly scary. So I'm gonna ignore it and just see what happens. And so I just laid there and just waited, and just nothing happened. I was just still stuck in the sleep paralysis. And then I'm not looking at it anymore. I'm not focusing on it. And I'm thinking, I've never been touched by one of these entities before. They've never, I mean, obviously I've been grabbed by one, but in that actual sleep paralysis mode, I've never been touched. And then I felt two fingers like that press into my back, just push. And oh, that freaked me out. And I snapped out of it, and I could still feel it. You know, when something touches you, you can kind of still feel it afterwards, especially if there's a pressure. I could still feel those fingers in my back after I snapped out of it, and it freaked me out. And very creepy.
Wow. So, I mean, there's all kinds of implications there, right? The first being that you have this panoramic view, sort of, even though you're facing the wall. How did you know that you were facing the wall?
Because I could see it. I could see it at the door. I knew exactly where it was standing at the door. But then when I didn't want to look at it, I just realized I was laying there staring at the wall, which is the opposite direction. And I couldn't move. I can't explain it.
So to me, that's once again, this sort of astral form or this soul that we talked about, the same thing that allows you to see yourself from a third person point of view. And then you said he's wearing a suit.
I mean, it was all dark, so the outline of it appeared to be kind of a long, like a zoot suit type thing.
I was talking to a guest. I forget which one it was, but they were talking about the Hat Man, and it was Vicky Joy Anderson, and she saw him differently than he was, because I've never personally seen him. I've seen shadow people, but both of my grandmothers and my father have seen him, and they all described him the same way. And so that's what kind of like lit the fire in as far as interest for me goes. But Vicky described him as wearing, a fitted suit. And a lot of people do. And so that's interesting to me. Did you know, this is a little side note, did you know that Wes Craven actually designed Freddy Krueger based off of his friend's sleep paralysis experience that he was told about when he was younger?
Okay, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, he's been around for a while, it seems.
Although if you go and watch the old show Amazing Stories, I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
What is it?
Amazing Stories. So when I was a kid, Steven Spielberg had this series, and it was kind of like the Twilight Zone, sort of, where it was just these different types of stories, usually paranormal, but sometimes they were just these crazy stories. And one of them was about a kid who had this shadowy figure who wore a wide brim hat who would help him, and was spooky. And I think it ends with him trying to interact with one of these entities, but it wasn't his Hat Man, it was someone else's Hat Man. I don't exactly remember the episode, but I don't know if chicken and egg situation. I'm not sure which came first, if he pulled that from somewhere in culture or if he invented that. But that was an episode from Amazing Stories.
Yeah, that is. There's a lot of these instances where you can find either characters that are designed based off of him. For example, in I think it was 1996. A gentleman from Japan was creating a video game for PlayStation 1. And the concept was basically that he thought he could change how a video game plays. In other words, you don't need a beginning and an end and, a bunch of obstacles to overcome in the meantime. Instead, video games could be sort of a three-dimensional art that you explore as a character. So he has these levels, I guess you could call them, and they're all based off of his dreams. So the entire game is very surreal, doesn't make a lot of sense. It's got a haunting feel to it, and I would say heavy with symbolism, just because when you're seeing objects and places and people in dreams, they're often symbolic, in a way. And so the game is very creepy. And there is a level in the game where there's a character in there, and the character is wearing a duster coat, and he's wearing a wide-brimmed hat, but you can't see any features of his face, and he's mostly shrouded in shadow. And this was the game designer's nod to the experience with the Hat Man that he had, although he didn't know what to call it. The terminology Hat Man wasn't really around back then. And that's a very similar thing with my grandmother's. Actually, I'm sorry, one grandmother in particular saw it. The other one saw small entities and large entities, but never a man with a hat. But she didn't know what to call it either. She would just tell me it was a man he looked like an old school detective. So there is these different pop culture references where he bleeds into them. When you saw him, you said he was mostly shrouded in shadow, right? You didn't see details?
No, I didn't see detail. I saw kind of the outline, but it was obviously a wide brim hat, and like you said, like a duster, a long suit. And
the other implication, as we were talking about those, is that there is a sort of telepathy aspect. Like this thing, one seems to be just watching.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to make of that. Apparently there is a guy, and I'll be sure to let you know when I get in touch with him. I think his name was Timothy M. Brown Jr., and he is working on a book right now. I'm going to screw up the title, but I think it's something like Hat Man Revealed. And he claims to have figured out the identity of this thing. Because the only details you get are the description, the physical description of him, and also that he seems to watch. I don't know what he's watching, but he does a fair amount of watching. And Vicky Joy Anderson, my previous guest, described him as an observer, speculated as to, is he taking notes? Is he trying to understand something? Is he trying to see how we react to certain things? When does that game get old? Seems to have been doing it for a long time. So there's a lot of questions as to like what this guy is and what he wants. And the other thing that I've heard is some people regard him as this harbinger of both bad things and good things. So some people regard him as visiting when a death in the family or a close loved one is going to occur. And then other people say that he shows up before, a big positive life-changing event. Maybe he's there to observe big moments and how humans react. But man, it is just entirely speculation. So people within this Hat Man community, the ones that know, we're just waiting for this guy. I emailed him. I want him to come on the show when he, releases the book. But it's very interesting to me that there is a guy out there who has not responded to my emails, who claims to know the identity of this thing. And then, the fact that maybe there is more interaction to be had with this entity if you can calm down and have a thought other than, oh my God, there's a guy in the room. There's an intruder in my home, because that's what you said, is that you, by this point, had sleep paralysis enough that you kind of were like, well, let's see what happens. And so maybe this guy's just standing over our bodies. Like, are you going to ask me anything? Are you going to, like, I'm here, and we're usually just engulfed in like, please go away. And trying to snap out of paralysis, but you sort of inadvertently interacted with him.
I definitely felt like
he responded.
My thoughts, yeah, because I thought these things have never touched me before, and then fingers pressed to my back. So, definitely.
And after that happened, did you fall back asleep? Did you wake up and get out of the paralysis?
I freaked out. Yeah, it was scary. The whole
And I
thing
imagine
was
he was long gone by then.
I felt safe. I'm like, well, these things have never touched me, so who cares? It's just gonna stand there and stare at me. Big deal. What do I have to be afraid of? And then he goes and pokes me in the back. So it definitely freaked me out.
Man, that's interesting. Not a lot of people. My father, he claims to, and I know a lot of people. I'm going to have somebody on soon, and she's had 300 plus sleep paralysis experiences from like 2018 till now. Mm-hmm. And she says she's even struck one of these entities. And I spoke to her at length, because when somebody tells you that, you go, okay, well, that's interesting. But after speaking to her for some time, she's sharp as a tack. She's very funny. She is seemingly all there. So, my father says himself that he's gotten out of it and marched up to his face and yelled in his face, and it never responds and it never does anything. And then it just kind of fades away. But he's like, that's how you get out of the sleep paralysis, is anger. I'm like, I'm not an angry dude. I don't know. It doesn't happen to me very often. It's only happened to me, I think, 2 or 3 times. And I'm blessed enough that my wife has this uncanny sixth sense for if I have paralysis, and she'll like wake up and then wake me up.
Okay.
And I don't know has anybody ever woken you up from paralysis?
No, I've woken people up during my experiences, including my wife, because I still have them, although they're very rare now. I wake my wife up, and I remember one time in particular at a religious retreat. So it was one of these weekend type retreats, and I was sleeping on the floor on a sleeping bag, and guys on either side of me, and I woke up, kind of a mumble scream, until I snapped out of it and just screamed, jumping up, and they're there going, oh, what's wrong with you? And then I'm, oh, nothing, and I go back to sleep, and they're just giving me strange looks the next day. But nobody's ever woken me out of it. It's usually the opposite.
I can say from experience, it is the most gratitude I've ever felt, was like being rescued from this situation. It's because it's terrifying. Have you experienced that as far as common attributes in these experiences? Have you ever felt that immeasurable sense of doom?
Oh yeah, they're always evil, all of them. You can feel, I feel it in my gut or in my chest, and you can feel like the prickly sensations on your arms. Sometimes I would go to bed and I'm like, tonight it's going to happen tonight. I know it is. I can kind of feel it. I feel that tension, and and I try to pray it away. And sometimes it would work, and sometimes it wouldn't. But yeah, it's always this looming dark feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the times where I can remember it happening to me, you have like a false sense of being soothed almost. Like I recognized that it was beginning to happen to me, but I could not summon the effort required to even just sit up. Like if you sit up and put your feet on the floor, it's going to stop, or maybe it's not, but I couldn't even summon the ability to do that. It was like part of me in my head was depressed, like panicking, knowing that I needed to take action in order to keep this from happening. But on the surface, I am much more likely to just let it happen and because I'm tired, but it's something much stranger than being tired. It's this complacency with something that is both like you're complacent and filled with terror. And that doesn't even make sense. It's not a biological function that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like we're about to enter, the Thunderdome, and it's time to get up and do something about this. But also there's like a super sleepy side that's totally cool with it happening. And it's complicated. It's very strange.
Right. Yeah. Like they play with each other where you're falling asleep. So your body's just kind of letting go, and you're in that letting go mode while this presence is and there is a definite presence, feeling of a presence in the room with you, at the same time. And yeah, and sometimes you don't fight against it because the feeling is to sleep and to be and just kind of let it happen. But I think the fight is something that you have to work up and over time and get in the practice of doing.
So, all right. So let's go forward. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I have a lot of stories. So probably. So I have a really cool story, which normally you don't have cool stories. But when I was in Saudi Arabia, so I was in the Air Force, and I was stationed in Saudi Arabia, and I went there in August of 2001. Which, if you know what happens in September of 2001, that was 9/11.
God, you were right there.
I was in the country where most of the bombers were from. So I went to one military base in Saudi Arabia, and then after 9/11, they moved me to a bigger base because they needed more people, and I was lowest ranking, so I was the guy to move. And so I got put in a room with this guy who was a Navy combat medic. I don't think that has anything to do with what happened, but it was just us two in a room, and very weird shifts. So I worked 13 hours a day, and we had to bus to work and bus back. It was a huge base, and I didn't sleep a whole lot, 4 to 5 hours a night. And one of the nights when I slept, I woke up and I looked in the middle of the room, kind of at the foot of the bed between the two beds. 3 little demon boys were skipping, holding hands. Were they holding hands? I don't know. They were holding hands and they were skipping in a circle and they were laughing. They were only about yay tall, but they were skipping as if to some kind of song, and they were laughing, and they had these little horns and these little hooves, and they were just like a mocking laughter, and creepy and kind of cool if you're not terrified, but I said my prayers and snapped out of it, and I was like, what the hell was that?
So was this was like a dream?
But it was sleep paralysis. So I was there and I was looking at it and I couldn't move. But like I said, in different
details
places,
on them.
They were all little boys. They actually looked like they were like 8 or 9, but shrunk down to the size of a toddler. And I remember little hooves and kind of like Mr. Tumnus, you know. What is he? He's a fawn. So,
man, what's the word for those things? A satyr.
Yeah. So they had
little horns, goat legs.
I don't remember if they had tails. They may have, but yeah. And they just skipped around in circles, the 3 of them, laughing, and I couldn't hear them laughing, but I could see them laughing and kind of throwing their arms up as they were going in circles and laughing. But it's interesting because so incredibly unique experience there in Saudi Arabia than back home in South Louisiana, where most things are just creepily looking at me. So, you know, and then I was in Korea and had some there, although not as distinct. But yeah, just interesting that in different, and that made me think about the Hat Man too. You know, I only saw him at my college dorm. And it also makes me think of, I don't go all over the place, but I've been following this exorcist, Father Chad Ripperger, and he says he's done some exorcisms where it's the same guy. He calls him Guy. It's the same guy that he's exorcised before. And so sometimes you have these recurring demons or characters that are very specific in nature, have a very specific function and purpose. And you can recognize them from that, and then exorcists do what specific things they got to do to get rid of them. But it's just interesting to think that they can have different kinds out there that you can experience.
Yeah. I this is not my idea, but it's something that I definitely agree with. Is this sentiment that the church sort of drops the ball when it comes to the supernatural aspects of life, in the sense that it writes everything off with the blanket term demon. This is demonic, that's demonic, that was a demon. When I imagine more accurately, there is a range of different entities. There's hierarchy of entities. And it seems to me that these things are moving about, doing their jobs, whatever it is that they do, and that you just so happen to get to peek behind the curtain more than other people do. And that's why different things are in different places. You know, the Hat Man being this observer, being in a college dorm, might just be observing people at one of the more pivotal moments of your life, right? I mean, as far as cognitive development and starting to become the person that you're going to be for the rest of your life, you're in the thralls of that in college. And so if he is truly an observer, then maybe that's a place that he, you know, is fond of being. And then these little horned satyr boys in Saudi Arabia, was it? And they're laughing and celebrating. I mean, this is entirely speculation at this point, but it's like we all know that the Middle East was a tumultuous place, especially immediately after 9/11, and that fear and negativity and sadness and anxiety that everybody from the soldiers to the locals are all feeling, that's like a buffet, if there are in fact entities that feed off of that sort of thing, which could explain why they were seemingly happy about it. In Korea, did you see something different or just something that you've already experienced?
I don't remember anything unique. I know they happened while I was there, but I don't remember anything especially unique or memorable about that one. It would be cool if I saw like a samurai, or I mean those are Japanese, but you know, something local, ethnic. But I think it was just the sleep paralysis, kind of your typical experience.
You know, I've heard that places in the Middle East are home to some of the oldest entities. And are you familiar with the Kandahar giant?
Yes.
That is one of my favorite stories for the listeners. And I've yet to get into this, and I'm going to have somebody on soon who, you know, is well versed in the Nephilim and giants and things of that nature, because that's one of my favorite topics. But in Kandahar, there is this story of a unit of soldiers coming across a red-haired giant living in the caves. I forget where is Kandahar exactly? Do you know? Afghanistan. Yeah, Afghanistan. That's right. And that the giant, like I said, it's a red-haired giant. And when they say red-haired, like very bright red hair and beard, and it's a man, but it's huge, and it engages these men and supposedly spears one of them and kills him. And they open fire on it, and it's incredibly resilient, and they end up having to concentrate fire on its head to the point where they basically decapitate it. And if you're looking to the old lore of Nephilim, you supposedly had to sever their head in order to effectively kill them. And that's just one of many absolutely bizarre stories that come out of that area. And it's my understanding too that the locals are very much like, yeah, there's giants here.
Yeah.
You just don't go near those caves because those caves belong to the giants.
Yeah.
Did you hear stories like that?
I mean, in Saudi Arabia, they have the idea of the jinn, which is kind of their version of like demonic entities. And I mean, I was only there for 3 months. We didn't go out and about because of everything going on, but they do have those stories out there about the haunted places and the jinn. And I've watched some videos of people doing ghost hunting out there and challenging them, and they're pretty extreme experiences from what I've seen.
I have seen those videos. These Middle Eastern men will go into all kinds of like, decrepit areas. And they're, we have ghost hunters in America. And, they kind of go around their ghost box and they go, is there anybody here that wants to share a message? In the Middle East, they kick the doors open.
Yes.
And they scream like, in the name of Allah, show yourself. And they are like so much more aggressive than the ghost hunters in America. Japan is funny too, because if you watch Japanese ghost hunting videos, which, I have, they are much more panicky and fear driven. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but there's just like this reaction that they have where they scream and they curse in Japanese and they do like a lot of running. And then you've got Americans that are like, is there anybody here that wants to talk to us? And then you have the Middle Eastern guys that are like kicking doors down and shit, and like they're much more aggressive with it. And who knows, maybe that's just part of the culture when those things are part of, I don't know, just the societal norm over there. It's like you have to be aggressive, you have to be convicted in your driving them out, and you have to go with the name of God, and it's not you're going to like you said before, like a spiritual war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cool how the different cultural backgrounds kind of determines how they approach these things. So I want to say in Japan they curse at them because in their tradition that's what you do, and in American tradition you don't want to do that because you'll make them more upset, and you don't want to challenge them. You want to be respectful to them. And then Middle East they go in there like warriors. I'm not going to put up with your mess. I'm here in the name of Allah, and I'm telling you to get out of here. So yeah, it's cool, the different practices.
So all right, so let's go forward. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
So I have one story that is probably the most profound in my life that I don't really share that often. And I've been kind of going over whether or not to, and I feel like I'm going to regret it if I don't. So I had one experience that was a good one. So all of them up to a point were evil. And it's kind of emotional because it's very personal. But so I was in the seminary, like I said, studying to be a Catholic priest. Obviously, that didn't happen. I left after 5 years. But I were out on a retreat, a weekend getaway, and I prayed before I went to bed about Our Lady, and I know that's a kind of a Catholic topic of Mary. And I was like, I don't know what you're about. Like, I don't get it. Help me to figure out what you're about. And
what is it that you were confused about? Because it's kind of a foreign concept to me.
So, we pray the rosary, and I prayed the rosary all the time since I was a kid. But that connection, like, I don't get you, Mary. Like, I know we ask you to pray for us, and you're tight with God, so you got like the inside on convincing him to do stuff, but it wasn't personal for me, with her, and I didn't get what a relationship with Mary was supposed to be. That was genuine interest, genuine just curiosity. And I was at this retreat, and we were in these kind of bunk beds, and I fell asleep, and I woke up, and there she was. I hate to share it because people are like, "Oh, you must have been holy." No, I was mocking people before I went to bed. So I was making fun of our librarian and the way she talked. So I was being a jerk. Anyway, so I wake up and I see her, and she's just standing with her arms like this, and
Almost as if kind of calling to you for embrace.
I felt what she was feeling. So they were at her sides. I can't do it just because of the awkward space I'm at. But at her sides, and I felt she was glorifying God. And it was also a posture of abandonment to God. Like, I'm all yours, in glory to you. And she was in a blue orb all around her, and these little white things were floating around her, which I don't know if they're angels. She had the stars around her head, 12 stars. And the feeling of love was overpowering. And what I felt I needed to do in that position was to love God. That's all I wanted to do. I couldn't move my body, so it was a sleep paralysis type situation. But I could move my hands. So I'm laying down and I could move my hands to the posture that she is in this kind of abandonment. And it was a beautiful experience. It was profound. And then I just fell asleep. And then I had a nightmare. I had a nightmare that I was in a truck with this guy who was saying, "We're going to go and we're going to find this demon that's worse than Satan. And we got to go get him." And he kept talking about this demon. And I'm filled with this profound experience. Even in this dream, I'm still feeling this profound experience. And this guy is telling me all about this demon. And I said, "Why do you want to talk about this demon? I just want to talk about God right now." And he looked at me and his eyes were red, just filled with hate. And I woke up in my bed, and there he was, sitting right next to me. Same guy from the dream. And he didn't stay very long. It wasn't long lasting, but I'd never had that experience outside of where something I saw in a dream appeared in sleep paralysis. So that was unique.
Do you recall what he looked like?
He looked like German background type, kind of like me. I'm trying to think of like an actor who would look like him. Adam Carolla, maybe.
That's funny.
Similar, but not the same. Kind of like 50s guy with like straight black hair and kind of bulky. So that was a pretty unique experience, and that was the most profound experience of my life was that one right there.
It's interesting because I was talking to someone, I can't remember who, but they were talking about the distinct feeling between something negative and a positive visitation. And it's so easily discernible, right? I mean, when the negative entity's there, it's this unbelievable sensation of terror and doom. Yeah. You know, I've had some experiences like that, and I can't even find anything remotely comparable in my waking life that would ever create such a feeling. You know, it was like contending with your impending doom. And then there's the flip side of it, where you have this experience with something positive, and the feeling of love is immeasurable. And very much the flip side of that coin, the perfect yin and yang. The same way you can't find something in your life where you would ever feel that level of doom, is the same way that you can't find something in your life where you would ever experience such a profound sensation of love.
In peace. As opposed to terror.
Yeah. How long ago was that one?
That one was in the summer of, it was in 2006. 2006, yeah.
And it feels like this man, whoever he is in the dream, he's upset with your, not having this desire to look into the darkness, not having a desire to go with him and find this evil. And then you describe these red eyes, and that one is like over and over and over again. You'll hear that. I experienced that myself, where I saw an entity that was sort of rage incarnate. It was mad too. And its eyes were like maraschino cherries. They were so bright and red, and it was so angry. But this one was angry because it couldn't, you were no longer interested in going on this journey with it.
Right. Yeah. And distinctly, the image of Mary was drawing me directly to God. I just want to give all my heart and love and focus to God. And then this thing is saying, hey, let's think about this demon. And so it really changed the way I looked at things afterwards, is that the focus needs to be on God, especially when these experiences are happening. What they want you to do is to draw you into isolation and thinking that you're helpless and alone. And I started to look at statues of St. Michael the Archangel. While he's fighting the demon, he's not even looking at the demon. He's looking up into heaven at God while he's fighting with the demon. So the focus is on God the whole time. So that kind of helped me to change my focus. So what does he not want me to think about? Well, he doesn't want me to think about how much I love and want to be with God. And so that changed how I approach things. And so towards the end, instead of saying, go away in the name of Jesus, I would just start to say, I love you, Jesus. And that became my prayer in that moment. And I picked up some other things along the way. And I think one of the things I shared with you before that is a punishment prayer from this book by Father Chad Ripperger, The Exorcist I mentioned. So if you want, I can share that.
I would love for that. But before we do that, I do want to highlight what you just said, is calling out in the name of Jesus, because, and this is something that just clicked for me based off of what you've said, calling out in the name of Jesus for protection out of fear is nowhere near as powerful as love is.
Sure.
And so you can call on Jesus because you're afraid, or you can call on Jesus out of love. And one of those, I would argue, is going to be significantly stronger than the other. And I think that is, I don't know about the audience, but definitely something that I personally am going to remember.
Right. Well, there's that verse, perfect love casts out all fear. And not that we can love perfectly like God can, but definitely that feeling of love overpowers the feelings of terror when you're focused on God in those situations.
Well, let's hear this prayer, because I could use it myself. I've got a bunch of not fun stuff happening every once in a while. And
gotcha. So Father Chad Ripperger, he of course he knows all kinds of prayers, and this book is full of his prayers, deliverance prayers for use by the laity, by Father Chad Ripperger, and it's full of prayers. But this one in particular is, before I go to bed, if anything happens to me, something's going to happen to whatever is attacking me. So you're going to have some consequences. So it's called the punishing prayer. And it's, Lord Jesus Christ, I ask thee that from now and until I fall asleep, while asleep, during my dreams, that if any evil spirit tries to affect me, you would punish him by making him focus on the thing that causes it the most pain during the entire time he tries to affect me, and for 10 minutes more. I also ask you to not allow him to retaliate in any way. So, and he talks about that there are certain things that makes demons filled with pain, whether it's love of God or just whatever is going to cause that thing pain, and for God to afflict that thing, so that if it comes after you, it's going to hurt.
I found through my own personal experiences this power of the name of Jesus Christ. And I didn't know about it before. I just had an experience and became very desperate and ended up praying very specifically, that this thing leave me and my family alone. And then that, as these experiences do, they put you down a path where you start to dig and research. And of course, I find this endless plethora of people calling out in the name of Christ in order to save themselves from various experiences, a lot of different experiences. And then of course I start to learn that, that's because there is power in the name of Christ and that we have authority over these entities through Christ. And I'm still coming to understand that. But one of the things that I believe, because of my own experiences, is that, and this speaks to the prayer that you just read, it helps to be specific.
Yeah.
It helps to think clearly and to articulate, whether it's, I'll do it out loud or I'll do it in my mind. And they seem to accomplish the same thing. But the key is very clearly articulating what it is that you want to happen. So I'll go into these things of, I'm the homeowner. They have no authority here. They don't belong here. To specifically leave my house, but also leave my family alone, and I'll think of their names.
Yeah.
And then even just as this little sort of just in case, I say to go where Jesus Christ wills you to be. Because I don't, I struggle. I'm like, do I want it? I don't want it on my front lawn. You know what I mean? But
I kick it out the window.
This is the way that I think about it. I'm like, I don't want it on my front lawn. I don't need it in the pool, in the lanai. I need it wherever Christ wills it to be is where I need it. And it's funny because I kind of have those thoughts, and then hearing that prayer and how very specific it was sort of reaffirms that in my mind of like, always cross your T's and dot your I's and be very specific with your intent.
It's interesting, because exorcists, they always want to know the name of the demon. And I'm like, well, can't you just say whatever's in there, get out of here, take a hike? But there's something powerful in knowing its name and being very specific, and you specifically get out of here. And I don't know why that is, but there's something to it because it seems to work.
Well, Paul, unless there's anything else you want to share, I think that is an excellent place to depart for the audience's sake.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you'd like? Just because I think that, one, leaving on a positive note and having such a profound and beautiful experience, and that message of being told, look towards God with love, and this is sort of the way. I think that's very impactful and very important. But is there anything else you'd like to say?
I mean, we could talk probably all day, but I think I've said it there. Focus on God. Don't focus on the evil. Don't give in to the fear. Think about what it's trying to pull you away from, and turn away from that, and bring it to God, and it'll kind of ruin its plans. So flip the script on the evil.
Well said, Paul. I want to thank you for especially because I had one guest lined up and then things didn't work out, and you were a good sport and you jumped right in there at the last second. And so I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing your stories, especially that last one. I know it was something that you weren't sure you were going to talk about, but I'm glad that you did. I think that that was the most important story, I think, because my show is not just about tell me your scariest thing. That serves a purpose. The purpose is, I think people should know that these things are real. And the way I came to know that they're real is by my own personal experiences, but then also testimony from people who have had their own experiences. And
Sure.
all of that creates this body of evidence. And so I want people to know that there are real forces at work in this realm, despite whether or not some of us see them or not. And so it's sort of pulling back the curtain on the darkness. But then there has to be something else on the other side of that, right? I don't want to just show people that there's greasy demons in the closet. I don't want, that's not the point of this. First, if I can get you to entertain that thought, then I'd very much enjoy giving people a solution. Because I've said it on several episodes, this experience is much stranger than we in the West give it credit for. And if it is true that these things exist, well, then so does God. And that is the most important takeaway. So, very much like the Arabs, I like to kick the door open on the ghosts. But then afterwards, I'd like people to leave with this, maybe just being a little bit closer to God.
Yeah, and to know that you actually have ways to fight back. You're not just helpless against it, even though you can't touch it or, although apparently somebody can punch it. But, there are things you can do. I know I'm Catholic, so I believe in specific things that some people don't, like holy water and Marian intercessions and saints and angels. But there are certain prayers you can pray, and there are certain things you can do to fight back, and people shouldn't feel powerless.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Paul, for your time. And I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So to the audience, thank you guys for listening to The Ravens Watch. I am your host, David Lee Corbo, aka The Raven. I hope you derive some good from this conversation. I know that I have. So once again, Paul, thank you very much, and you have a good night.
All right. Thank you, David.